We have people still signing on, but I appreciate your punctuality. Though many of you who are already logged in, we have a pretty big crowd today. And out of respect for your time, we want to get started right away. As we begin this seminar on board meetings, I did want to take a moment, if I could, and find out who we have in the audience today. I just put a poll on the screen. I'm curious to find out who you all are. So if you could just take a moment, let me know what my audience is, and that might also affect some of the ways that we present the topics on board meetings today. We have a pretty big split as you are logging in between managers and association members. So far, we don't see any business partners. We'll give it a few more seconds. Almost exactly 50-50 split. Wow. All right. Well, we have about as close to 50-50 as it gets without being exactly 50% managers and 50% association volunteers. We have no business partners, and if there are competing law firms logged in today monitoring the seminar trying to learn something from me, they are not admitting it in this poll. All right. So let me get out of that. All right. Thank you for that. Well, let's launch into the material, shall we? One of the first things I want to remind you, if this is your first RHO webinar, please make sure that if you have questions during the presentation, use the question function. Do not use the chat function. After our presentation of exactly 45 minutes is concluded, I will have 15 minutes allocated to answer as many questions as I possibly can. Also, if you did not get the materials in the email that went out this morning from me, the materials are available in the handouts function. If you press the plus sign there, it will open up and you can download any of the handouts that we have for you today. Okay. I also added to the handouts my boring biography. If you don't know who I am, instead of wasting your time right now, you can pull that down as well. All right. Is it a dream to have board meetings that are 90 minutes long, where people show up prepared, everyone is organized, people treat each other with dignity and respect, even though they strongly disagree about some things? Well, I think that board meetings are the bane of every HOA manager and every HOA volunteer director, and certainly all of us HOA attorneys. Board meetings are where huge amounts of time are spent. It's where the action happens. And unfortunately, the prevailing practice of board meetings is really not as high as it should be. So what I'd like to do today is address a number of specific topics, a little bit more advanced topics that are recurring things that I'm either asked by people that write into my newspaper column each week, or that clients ask me all the time, or that I'm just finding just recurring issues where my manager and director folks are struggling. So that's what I want to do today. I want to address some of those topics. Let's get very practical as we begin to talk about the environment in which our board meeting happens. Before we talk about any procedures, attitudes, practices, or certainly before we talk about the law, is our room setup conducive to a board meeting or a town hall meeting? Now look at the room you have in these two photographs on the screen. Everyone is facing the audience. Now if I'm sitting in that audience and I'm looking at these 5 people facing me, what does that configuration tell me about my role? And who are they talking to? Are they talking to each other? Not really. They're talking to me because they're all facing me, the audience member. A lot of times we start out with a room configuration that conveys the notion that this is a discussion not only between the people around the board table, but it's a discussion with the audience. And obviously it's a truism. The folks in the audience have not read the board packet. They have not prepared for the meeting, and they're not legally held accountable for the decisions. You volunteer directors are being held accountable for your decisions. And so one of the things also that this type of room configuration sets up, and I hope you haven't seen this much, but you will occasionally from time to time have a director who will grandstand to the audience, who will specifically not speak to his or her colleagues on the board, but will grandstand and make statements to the audience to try to ingratiate themselves with the audience. And obviously that's disrespectful to the rest of the board. So this really is a setup that if you can avoid it, I really strongly suggest that you do avoid it, because you're conveying a message you don't mean to convey. The perfect configuration that I'd like to see we'll look at in just a moment. But here's another problem that I see a lot of times with our board meetings. How many of us wind up struggling to put our notes and our agenda packets on our laps as we're sitting around in somebody's sofa and love seat in their living room? And how hard is it to have a business-like meeting when we really are set up more for a coffee klatch? Now, I realize, particularly with smaller associations, you probably don't have a clubhouse, certainly don't have a specific boardroom set up, and you may have to have your board meetings in somebody's living room where the chairs are moved around, and you have some rows of fold-up chairs for the audience to sit in. But I just really would suggest that, again, set up an atmosphere of seating, set up an atmosphere of an audience setup where it conveys the notion that we may be homeowners and neighbors working together, but we are here to do business, and we're setting up as business-like an environment as we can. And that will really help move you towards the feel that we're here to do business, we're here to talk to each other. Now, I know not all of you have rooms where you can accomplish this type of a setting as I've got on the screen for you now. But this is what I would love to see in a perfect world, where the 5 directors are in a semicircle or the letter C, upside down U, pick however you'd like to describe it. But people can look at each other on the board. They're talking to each other. The open end of the semicircle is facing the audience, so the audience can see and hopefully hear what's being said. But it's very clear these people are deliberating with each other. They're not deliberating with the audience. The more you can do to set up your room in this kind of a format, the more you're going to convey the notion of a business-like environment, and at the same time convey the notion to the audience that you are absolutely welcome to observe. But that is your role, with one exception, is to observe. And we'll talk about that. One exception right now. And that exception, of course, is open forum. Now, open forum is often referred to as a First Amendment, a free speech right. Bluntly, it really isn't a free speech issue. Open forum is something that's not provided by the Constitution of the United States. Open forum is provided by something that we all know and love called the Davis-Stirling Common Interest Development Act. We have something called the Open Meeting Act that starts at Civil Code Section 4900. That is where we have the right to speak. So I don't mean to be disrespectful, certainly, of our Bill of Rights, but this is a private entity. It's a private organization at which only members can attend, and the First Amendment is not specifically in play. So I hope you don't hate me already, but I have to tell you the truth, not necessarily what sounds good. So as we talk about open forum, I think that there are some very specific techniques where we can either enhance the community or detract from the community, or actually make things worse. First of all, open forum. This open forum needs to be either this, where we have 2 switches. One half of the room is on and the other half of the room is off. That's what we want to see. Or is your open forum more like this, where it's a jumble of communications, people talking over each other, interrupting each other, both from the board and from the audience? Obviously, that's not what we want to see, is a jumble. We want to see an organized presentation where everybody feels like their time has been respected, they have been heard, they have had the same fair opportunity everybody else had to speak, even if they aren't as loud and forceful in their vocal projection as other people, even if they aren't as tall or as booming a voice, that they have just the same respect and time as everybody else. So that's really key. So we want a situation where open forum is like the left part of the screen, where part of the room is on and part of the room is off. And of course, which part of the room is on during open forum? The audience. Which part of the room is off during open forum? The board. The board is there to listen. It's the one time that the switch or the valve, whatever you want to call it, reverses. Most of the meeting, the audience is there to listen, except for this one time. This is the time that they get to speak, And the board has to listen. The board should listen. The board owes to the members their ear to hear and listen to what people are saying. So how do we deal with open forum, and how can we make it a much more positive aspect of our community? I am very well aware, ladies and gentlemen, that many boards and managers and even lawyers look at open forum as a necessary evil. It's something to endure. It is not just something to endure. It is a very valuable and useful tool to enhance the neighborliness and the cooperation in your community. So let's talk about some ways that we can enhance open forum as a positive part of our board meetings and as a positive part of our community. First, when do we have open forum? Now, the law doesn't tell us when in the course of the board meeting or membership meeting, and remember, they're required in both membership meetings, such as annual meetings, and board meetings. Open forum is supposed to be in all association meetings. When do we put it? A lot of folks argue that open forum should be at the end of the agenda when everything else is finished. I really have a problem with this. The law doesn't say you can't put it at the beginning of the agenda or the end of the agenda. But my problem with this is, if you put it at the end of the agenda, what's really going on here? Well, bluntly, people that put it at the end of the agenda are saying, well, open forum is, it's a time that it's irritating and it consumes a lot of time, and people just go on and on and on. And so we put it at the end of the meeting so we've got the business out of the way, and then we can sit there and just endure open forum. Well, that tells me that we've got the wrong understanding and certainly the wrong attitude about open forum and what it's supposed to accomplish. I really would suggest, ladies and gentlemen, that whether you're a board member who has a say in the agenda or whether you're the manager who is making recommendations, I really think open forum should be at the beginning of the meeting. Why is that? Well, a number of reasons. First of all, not everyone is required to attend the whole meeting. They're there just to tell you that there's a street light out around the corner from them, or they're to tell you that there's been a recurring problem with misuse of an association common area. They're there to let you know something. Why force them to sit through the whole meeting just so that they can convey one piece of information to you? The second thing is, what about the respect factor? What are you telling the homeowners when you put them dead last after everything else is done? You're telling them that their input really isn't that high a priority for your association. I really would suggest, and I may lose some friends right here early on in this webinar, but I really suggest open forum be at the beginning, not at the end of your agenda. Also, before you start open forum, what if you explain what open forum is about? I love to sit in board meetings where the chair says before open forum starts, tells the audience, ladies and gentlemen, any member of the association has the opportunity now to speak to the board and relay information, ask questions, raise concerns, and you have 3 minutes. And we will not interrupt. We will not be answering your questions because this is your time. So please, the time is yours. Please use it well. And at the end of open forum, that is when the board will answer what questions it is able to answer, and then we'll resume the rest of the agenda. And at that point, then the audience will listen and the board will begin talking again. It'd be great to give that explanations because not everybody who attends your board meeting is a regular. And also you're laying down the ground rules and reminding people how much time they have. Now, the next thing, of course, is the board needs to be committed to making open forum important, to making open forum valuable. And that means you're going to listen. You're not going to defend yourself. You're going to take notes. You're not going to respond or interject or defend yourself. It's your time to sit there and listen. It's their 3 minutes. They can use it however they want. That is so critical, ladies and gentlemen. If you're going to ask the audience to be quiet and listen to you, then you darn well better be willing to be quiet and listen to them. That's only fair, isn't it? So don't respond, don't interject, don't answer questions during their time. Wait until open forum is completely done. And let me tell you, if you do begin to answer questions, or you let people understand that they might have their questions answered during their 3 minutes or as soon as their 3 minutes is done, then you're going to have homeowners coming up with a list of interrogation questions where they're going to hit you with 15 questions and they're going to demand that you answer all of them on the spot. And now all of a sudden you're getting beaten up. That's not fair. Listen to the questions. Don't answer them. Don't interject. And when open forum is completely done, that's the time for the board to speak and to answer questions or to refer things to a committee or to staff or to a future agenda. You remember, cannot discuss or deliberate on people's open forum remarks unless they bring up an emergency. If somebody walks into the room in open forum and says, we have a water main right now that's broken and it's undermining the street 2 blocks away from where we're all sitting, okay, that's an emergency. We're going to talk about that right on the spot. If you have 20 people or 30 people, or this happened to me this week, we had over 100 people, of which the majority wanted to speak in open forum. Can the board adjust the time limits to give everybody a fair opportunity to speak? Absolutely. I suggest it be on a board motion. If you have a full room and you ask for a show of hands at the beginning of that meeting and you see 30, 40, 50 people all want to speak, then I suggest the chair ask for a motion from the board to shorten the time limit from 3 minutes to 2 minutes and explain to the folks in the audience that this is to make sure everybody has a full and fair opportunity to speak so that not just the first few people get all the time and then everybody's all exhausted by the time we get to the end of the people that wish to speak. It's absolutely okay. The Davis-Stirling Act does not tell us how long open forum has to be. It just says we have to have open forum and we can have a reasonable time limit. So I think 3 minutes is a great rule of thumb, except if you have a lot of speakers, then I think you can absolutely shorten it to 2. By the way, can you insist that people tell you in advance what they're going to talk about? No, I don't think you can. Some of my clients still are in the habit of asking people to indicate the topic they wish to address during open forum. They can refuse. They don't have to commit in advance to what they want to talk about, but they do have to be a member, and I think most associations are pretty good about asking people to give their address. Open forum is closed. The chair announces that open forum is closed, and then we begin to respond and show the members that we were listening, that we referred things to the manager to look into, or that the landscaping chair is able to answer a question posed by a member about a tree trimming schedule. That's when the board finally starts speaking. Now, what happens if during the course of the meeting the board realizes that the board needs further input? Can open forum be reopened? Absolutely. And what a great way to show the community that you're serving the community and you're listening and you want to listen. There are going to be some times, not every meeting, where an issue will arise that the board is going to realize we have a fair number of people in the audience. We'd really like to hear what people have to say. So have a motion to reopen open forum on a specific topic. Now, you probably all know that when you're voting on a rule change, when it's the final vote after you've given 30-day notice, you're supposed to have an open forum time specifically on that proposed rule change. So that's a required reopening of open forum. But if there's something else going on where you want to know, hey, we're thinking about reviewing the pool hours. How many people would be upset if we close the pool at 8 o'clock instead of 9 p.m.? Great example of the use of reopening open forum. Okay. Now let's move on to another topic that comes up from time to time, and this is usually when we have a director who is unable to attend. They're traveling, they're on the road a lot, and they would like to be able to participate in the board meeting telephonically or through Skype or something like that. Well, the California Corporations Code 7211A6, which I've got up on the screen, says that yes, a nonprofit mutual benefit corporation, which is what our common interest development associations are, people can participate by Skype or by telephone, speakerphone. The key is that everybody participating in the meeting has to be able to hear one another. All right? So the Davis-Stirling Act also specifically contemplates this. Civil Code Section 4090B, one of the two definitions of a board meeting is a teleconference. Sorry about that. Where we have a quorum all connected at the same time through audio or video. And again, we have to have everybody that's entitled to attend that meeting, in other words, the non-director homeowners, they have to be able to hear as well. So whatever we do in terms of setting up that teleconference or the Skype conference, the person speaking has to be able to hear the people who are participating electronically and vice versa. So that may mean that you don't have the right equipment as well, because I got to tell you, Sometimes I have folks setting a cell phone on the table, and that really doesn't work well for the audience, and oftentimes the person on the phone really can't hear what's going on. So if you're going to have these telephone conference participation, you are not required, but make sure that everybody can truly hear. And by the way, you could have a meeting where everybody participates by conference call. Now that's a little tricky, because how do you keep the people on the conference call other than the board from talking and interjecting? But you could have open forum, you could have the entire meeting by conference call. Notice though that you do have to have one physical location that is open. Anyway, Civil Code 4925 on your screen also contemplates electronic or telephonic participation. If you're going to have electronic or telephone conferencing, check your equipment. Again, please don't use a cell phone. Spend a few $100 on a speakerphone that you can put on the tabletop so that everybody can hear each other. Is off-site conferencing of an otherwise absent director, is that mandatory? No, it's not. The law says you can do it. You as a board may decide for reasons of you don't have the right equipment, maybe the signal in your particular meeting room doesn't work very well. I know sometimes I have one client that their boardroom is actually in a basement level of their building, and the cell phone reception is pretty much non-existent. Instead of making the decision on an ad hoc basis, though, decide in advance. What is your board's policy about participating by teleconference? If you are going to allow it, then be set up for it, have the right equipment, and so people know in advance that even if they're on the road, they can call into the board meeting and deliberate in decisions that way. But again, you don't have to. That's a decision that the manager and the board are going to make together from time to time. Now, this email thing, I'm pretty sure that it's a passing fad. I'm sure that in a year now, we're all going to get tired with email and go back to sending postal letters or delivering messages by hand, or maybe passenger pigeon, or, oh wait, they're extinct. Maybe by smoke signals, I don't know. But until email goes away and leaves our normal business lives, board members still want to use email to deliberate. And this is a very common violation of the Open Meeting Act. Civil Code 4910A specifically says, A and B, says that business has to be taken on in the board meeting. And that even though the Corporations Code has a section that does allow electronic meetings, boards are not allowed to deliberate in electronic mail. And the only exception to that, which we'll talk about in just a moment, are electronic decisions where we have an emergency. Civil Code 4910B2 allows email to discuss true emergencies, something that cannot wait 4 days for a special notice, a specially noticed board meeting, if all the directors on the board have in writing consented to emergency decisions by email. And those consents are supposed to be filed with the minutes of the board, and then the board can make decisions by email. But that's the only circumstance. Now, does this mean that board members cannot send email to each other, or that managers cannot send emails to the board? Absolutely not. But here's how it works. Look at the first email where somebody is simply conveying information. That is absolutely okay. We say to board member Jerry, could you find out if Acme would be interested in making a proposal for our association? And Jerry sends an email to the board and manager, dear board, yes, Acme is interested. That's fine. You're conveying information. Here's where it becomes a problem, though. It's when the board member responds and says, hey, I think Acme is a great choice. I think that's somebody who we should think about. That response is the deliberation. So it's going to really take discipline from the board and from the manager to remind your colleagues on the board that, oh, okay, wait a minute, we can't talk about that now. Let's hold it. Thank you for the information, Jerry. Let's hold this off, please, until we can have a board meeting. So email is useful, but not to deliberate. And remember, email is evidence. You don't want to have documents created where the board is discussing things outside of the board meeting and repeatedly violating the Open Meeting Act. Not only does that violate the law, but it also destroys the trust the association has in the board when they learn, and they eventually will, that the board is making a lot of its decisions before they ever get into the board meeting, which means the board meetings are more of a show than a real meeting, which insults the neighbors. We don't want to do that. Disagreement. Some ideas really aren't that great, and maybe it's okay that we question those decisions. If only these three young men had questioned their decision on that fateful night that now lives in infamy in the internet. Disagreement is fine. Unanimity is overrated. Here's the reasons why. First of all, unanimity is unnecessary because legally speaking, a 3-2 vote is every bit as binding as a 5-0 vote. Unanimity puts way too much pressure on dissenters because if I'm dissenting and the association is trying for a unanimous vote, then I'm basically being a roadblock to the association being able to move forward, and that puts all kinds of pressure on me. That's really hard. It also causes decisions to be delayed because people are trying so hard for unanimity. We can't move forward until everybody agrees, so we're going to have to postpone this for yet another month, and that's really unfair to the association, to the neighbors. It also extends the discussion, and it almost always will lead to frustration because everybody says, well, we can't get Jerry to agree. I guess we're going to have to put this over until next month, and now we're going to try to see if we can get Jerry to bend. That's not right. And also, does that mean that the board is going to have to water down its decision to try to get this last director on board? Not healthy. You don't want to make the dissenters feel disloyal and that they're doing something wrong. That puts them under a lot of pressure, and that's unhealthy. You do need people to feel that it's okay to disagree. So there is one time unanimity is critical. The one time you want to have a 5-0 or a 7-0 vote is when you're making a major decision for the association. You're getting ready to commit the association to several $million, or you're pursuing an amendment of the governing documents, CC&Rs or something. You want to have, the community needs to know that the board is united on those really big, important things. But fortunately, those big, important things don't come along all that often. So it's okay to have disagreement. We want people to look at things differently, to ask questions, vote no, and then move on. And that's a really healthy thing. We don't want to have a Stepford board, right, where everybody just smiles and says, great idea, Bob. Great idea, Bob. How about recording meetings? That's a great idea, right? Well, the Penal Code has something to say about recording meetings secretly or conversations secretly. First, keep in mind that association meetings are only open to members, so they are not public meetings. They are private meetings. Penal Code Section 632A says that if you secretly record a confidential conversation, that you can be sent to jail in the county Hoosgow for up to a year, and if you've done it repeatedly, you can even go to prison and be fined up to $10,000. So this is long-standing law. It's been on the books for a long time. You will, from time to time, folks, have members that, in times of conflict in the association, feel like it's okay to bring their little iPhone and set it on record, or build their little pocket dictating machine and record the meeting. That's not okay. You really, recording is never necessary, and I think it's never a good idea. Remember that your meetings are only open to members. It's not a public meeting. When people know they're being taped, it intimidates them. They're not going to want to speak freely. So it already is going to put a negative air, an intimidating air to your meeting. Sometimes I'm told that, well, we need to record our meetings because we want to make sure our minutes are accurate. Well, your minutes don't need a recording to be accurate, because all you're supposed to be writing down are the motions that are made and what happens to the motion. The whys and wherefores and who said this and who said that, that's not meeting minutes. That's a transcript. So if you need recording to make sure your minutes are accurate, then you're not taking the minutes you're supposed to be taking. I really urge all my clients, and I know I've written this in my newspaper column as well, I don't think associations should allow recording of meetings ever. There is one rare setup, and I know that some of you on the webinar today are at associations that have this. Very large communities sometimes have television studios and have their boardrooms set up with cameras to actually have a full-on broadcast of the meeting like a city council. That's a different story. I will tell you, even in those circumstances, I have seen the grandstanding factor, but at least it's out in the open and everybody knows what's expected. So that's a little bit different situation where you actually have a TV studio. Well, let's now talk about committee meetings. And one of the things here that comes into play is that sometimes we unintentionally have our committee meetings turn into board meetings. Keep in mind that the definition of board meeting changed a number of years ago in the Davis-Stirling Act. According to Civil Code 4090A, a board meeting is any time a quorum of the board is discussing any HOA business. It used to be that the definition of a board meeting was any time a quorum of the board was getting together to discuss an upcoming agenda item. That then was a board meeting. So as long as the board was getting together to talk about something that was not on an upcoming agenda, you were okay. That is no longer okay. So anytime you're discussing any HOA business at all, whether or not it's on an agenda, if you have 3 out of your 5 directors or 4 out of your 7, that's a board meeting. So what happens if 3 of your 5 directors all are really interested in landscaping and they are part of the landscaping meeting? Well, under the Davis-Stirling Act, that is a board meeting. That means you have to give 4-day agenda notice, you have to have open forum, you have to have minutes. Really problematic. So let me give you some tips on how to make sure that your committee meetings are effective and do not run afoul of the Davis-Stirling Act. First, just don't have a quorum of the board on the committee. Make sure that you, if you have a 5-member board, don't appoint more than 2 directors to that committee. Frankly, you don't want to have a majority of your board on the committee anyway, because then it's really not a committee anymore. The whole purpose of the committee is to take work outside of the group of the board and have other people help the board out with specific topic areas. Do have 1 or 2 directors attend. I do think that it's a great idea to have at least 1 director on each committee, because then the board has a connection to the committee and vice versa. Committee minutes are just not necessary. You don't have to keep minutes because the product of most committees is called a report. The only time you have to keep minutes is if the committee has final decision-making authority, and that's pretty rare. So your product that you're creating out of your meeting is a report where you're making recommendations to the board. And please, committees, those reports should be in writing. Managers, encourage your committees to submit written reports to go into the board packet. And chairs on this call, don't have those reports read out loud orally or presented orally. Just have them attached to the board packet, so then there's a record of what the committee recommended. Boards, when you are receiving a report, there's no need for a motion to approve. The minutes simply should note the board received a report from the landscaping committee. If there's any question as to what the landscaping committee said, we have the written report that contains that recommendation or that information. And you don't need a motion to approve the report, because if you approve the report, does that mean that if they're asking for action that you are also approving the action in the report? It can get confusing. So just secretaries on this call, just say the board received the landscaping committee written report. The board received a report from the financial committee. The board received a report from building and grounds. Okay, that's enough. Now, if the report does recommend action, then that needs to be very specifically noted in the report, and now we do need a board motion on the action recommended. And I really suggest that managers, board chairs, have a committee member plan on attending the board meeting. If they're asking for action to be taken by the board, somebody should be available to help answer questions from the board, if there are any, regarding that committee's recommendation. And boards, really rely on your committees. If you're going to give the committee some responsibility, make sure that you use that input and that you rely on them. Unless there's a really good reason to reject the recommendation of a committee, you really ought to be following their recommendation. Otherwise, maybe you have the wrong people on the committee, or you really don't want a committee. And lastly, please don't do committee work in the board meeting. The board meeting is the time to make decisions, not to break apart the landscaping proposal and talk about where the bushes should go. That's committee work. Let the committee do their work. Now, managers, about half of you on this call are managers, and some of you are not being used by your clients to your full abilities and your full potential, and that's really discouraging. Board members, managers are trained to inform and advise you. Make use of the training. Make use of their experience. Your manager on 95% of your decisions in every board meeting is going to be your business judgment rule due diligence on those decisions. You don't need to have a lawyer tell you whether or not you should approve a given patio alteration. That recommendation is typically going to come from your manager. Whether you should pay a bill or not pay a bill. That's why the manager is there. Your manager is there to provide that due diligence that the business judgment rule expects of you. So ask for manager input, their advice, their recommendation on motions. Your managers are also the ones that are credentialed. They're going to be ready to recommend and alert you when you need more special advice that's beyond the expertise of the manager. Manager's report should be part of every board meeting. It's a great way to let the community and the board know what their manager is doing for them, what the manager has accomplished, and also when managers have spending authority, that's really a great place to inform the board of what expenditures the manager made within the authority previously given to them by the board of directors. Remember, you're paying for the manager to gather information and to evaluate that information and then bring you some recommendations so you can make good decisions. Again, make the use of what you're paying them to do. And if you do the manager's job for them, you may have reasons, well, I'm really into this topic, or I don't think the manager's quick enough on the spot, or I don't think we're getting good enough service. When you interfere and do the manager's job and not let them do their job and be your manager and your advisor, you're going to burn them out. And you're going to discourage the manager, and you're going to burn yourself out too, because you're going to be working far harder. Remember, board members, how much are you getting paid to do this? Exactly, nothing. So why are you doing the manager's job? You're paying them to do a job. Let them do the job. Expect them to do the job. Come to the board meeting ready to make good decisions, and you're going to be a lot less tired. Okay, a couple of thoughts about minutes. These continue to be a problem with so many associations. Your board secretary does not need to be a court stenographer. If your poor secretary is not allowed to deliberate on motions because they're so busy writing down everything everybody says, they need some retraining. And secretaries, I just want to remind you that minutes should not be a choke point. Minutes are simply supposed to record who attended the meeting, what reports you received, and what motions were made and what happened to the motions. You do not use the minutes to record the whys and wherefores of all of your decisions. Okay? That's not minutes, that's a transcript. When you do want to record the whys and wherefores are in those major decisions that need to be recounted or stated in a board resolution, which is typically a document your legal counsel will help you with. That is a document that's intended to explain the good faith business judgment reasons why the board in 2016 made a certain major decision. Okay? So secretaries, be encouraged. Many of you are working far too hard. Managers, protect your secretaries. Let them participate as a director. Don't work so hard overcooking the minutes. Is this the kind of minutes that you want to see for your association? John said Larry had no idea. Larry said John was an idiot. Sally moved to remove Larry from the board because he's lazy. And then Mary commented that Larry, is this what you want to see? This doesn't look professional. Here's the kind of minutes that you want to see. Most minutes from most association meetings should be 1 to 2 pages long, because you're not quoting what people say, you're not quoting the contents of reports, you're simply noting who attended, what motions were made, and what reports were received. And it's amazing how you'll find, if you do your minutes efficiently and properly, how often they will fit in 1 to 2 pages. Yes, it's possible. Now let's deal with, disruptors. Many of you are thinking about certain people right now. Instead of the demon pictures I've got on the screen, you have somebody else's face and somebody else's name. Okay, and okay, that's fine. But let's talk about dealing with disruption, because that can obviously is always a problem that pops up in associations. Are there some disruptions and interruptions of meetings that are good? Uh, Remember that just because somebody's a helpful association member doesn't mean that it's okay to allow them to interject and provide information, but then the people who are critical and disruptive and rude, they don't get to interject in the meeting. I have attended board meetings over the years where the people who often spend a lot of time volunteering, it's amazing how they get the right to speak up and interject in the board meeting, but the people who are unpleasant, they're shut down by the chair. Let's be fair. Whether you're a saint or a sinner, disrupting, interjecting in the board meeting is never a good idea. So ban all disruption, or don't complain about the chaos that results from allowing lots of interjections from the floor in your board meetings. So here are some quick steps in dealing with disruption. I'm a big advocate of gentle but firm escalation. So the first thing when somebody's interrupting the meeting is a warning from the chair. Mr. Richardson, would you please sit down? Open forum is closed. We really need to deliberate here. You're welcome to listen, but we need to ask that you pipe down. That doesn't work. Richardson says, I will be heard. Well, the next step is a motion by the board to admonish that member to quiet down. If that doesn't work, the next step is a motion by the board to expel the member. I'm sorry, Mr. Richardson, the board is by a 5-0 vote asked you to leave the meeting due to your continued disruptions and behavior. If that doesn't work and Richardson says, I'm not leaving, I have a right to be here, then announce a brief recess of the board meeting so that law enforcement can be called. I found that most of the time, when people realize you're literally going to call the police, they will go ahead and leave the room because that member is now disturbing the peace and creating a potential problem. If your rules provide for it, and if they don't, by the way, you ought to think about this, have a disciplinary hearing set for disrupting the board meeting and find that homeowner. Make sure that you're not taking close calls. Let's not be picky here. But if somebody is really disrupted the board meeting and cost everybody 30 minutes before the meeting could return to order, then maybe that's a time to hold a disciplinary hearing and fine them if your rules provide for it. If they don't, think about changing your rules. Please, managers, chairs, do not adjourn your meeting just because somebody's disrupting it. When you do that, that means they win. Have a recess so that they can calm down or so they can be excused from the meeting, but don't stop the whole association's governance because of that person. Okay? That's not fair to the other 99% of your community. So take these steps, gentle escalation, but firm escalation, and raise the bar of what we expect from neighbors. Most of the other community members attending those meetings are going to thank you for it. They may be afraid to thank you for it in front of that person, but they're going to thank you for it later. Well, as we wrap up this, a couple of things I want to talk about. Your top 5 time wasters. Number 1, failing to use consent calendars. It's amazing to me how many managers are not making sufficient use of consent calendars. There are so many non-controversial items on your agenda, they just don't all need to be discussed. Use a consent calendar. Over discussion. When it's clear, chairs, that there's a consensus or that we can see where the board is going on this, let's move it along. Let's call for the question. A lot of meetings go way too long because the discussions are just too much. Everybody's in agreement that this particular painting contractor needs to be terminated. Okay, we don't need to go on and on about how terrible they are. Let's call for the question. Straying off agenda topic. This is huge. Chairs, this is where you kind of have to be firm, not mean, but firm. Keep people on topic. That wastes a lot of time. And by the way, the Open Meeting Act requires that you stay on your agenda. Also, watch out for when you're doing the manager's work or you're doing committee work in your board meeting. Sometimes you're not quite ready to make a decision, and so it's okay to put it off if you find you're actually sitting here getting out the chalkboard and drawing things up in the meeting. And lastly, another big time waster is allowing, and sometimes associations even encourage, member participation in the meeting deliberations. That's just a bad idea. Again, it's a board meeting. The directors are being held legally accountable. They are the ones that are getting the board packets. They're the ones that are committed by and elected by the homeowners to serve in those positions. The people kibitzing in the audience, they have their opinions. That's great. But they're not the ones being held responsible for those decisions. The 60 to 90 minute board meeting is not just a fiction. It is the one thing on this screen that actually can exist, and you can make it happen. One last topic as we wrap it up, being right at 15 after the hour. Really consider having meeting rules. Meeting rules can be such a positive influence in your community. Meeting rules can help tell the attendees about when the board meets, who can attend, who can't attend, how we handle open forum, what is closed session, what happens in there, the requirement of posted agendas, of course, what conduct is expected. How do we handle disciplinary hearings? How many minutes do you have if you're called before the board to talk? When can you get draft minutes? And a board code of conduct and confidentiality promise, those are all things that can and should be in meeting rules. And of course, they would be adopted with a 30-day agenda notice, 30-day notice to all the community, just like any rule change. A great technique to really raise the bar in your board meetings and the conduct of your directors as well. So I hope that these topics have been helpful in maybe helping you directors and managers with some tools to raise the bar in your board meetings, make them more efficient, make them more powerful, make them more positive, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? It's having positive meetings, meetings where our community owners feel affirmed and happy to be there and happy about participating in their community. I'm going to open the floor now to questions, but for those of you that may not stay during the question time, I do want to thank you for listening. We had a great crowd today, and it looks like we have a bunch of questions I'll be responding to in a moment. Our next webinar will be on March 23rd. That's a Wednesday, 11:30 a.m. I checked to make sure, once again, it doesn't conflict with any of the CAI chapters in California, at least in Southern California, so hopefully you'll be able to attend that. As usual, it'll be 45 minutes with 15 minutes after. Well, let's if I can open up the questions panel. We've got just a ton of questions here, so let me handle as many as I can. I do see one person said they had trouble downloading a handout. We can certainly email any of those to you. If you send me an email, I'll be happy to send those to you. Also, this will be available as a recorded session in about two calendar days from today. It will be on the rhopc.com website. Question from Stephanie: is there a practical way to allow non-directors, in other words, members in the association, to call in to meetings, and are we allowed to mute them except for open forum? And yeah, that's certainly possible. If the board would like to allow people to call in and listen in on a conference type service, and then you mute them except for the open forum time, that's absolutely a very creative way to try to encourage homeowners to observe board meetings. Can we restrict open forums, she asks, only to those who attend in person? Well, that's interesting. If you're allowing people to attend the meeting electronically, it would seem to me that they would have the right that goes with the attendance, in other words, open forum. So I think the answer would be yes. Let's see. Raymond asked the question, to show due diligence, I include the items considered in the minutes. Is this a good practice? Well, I'm not saying it's a bad practice, Raymond, but that's going to make your minutes longer than they need to be. Most of the time, again, your due diligence is your board packet. Your manager hopefully is providing you a board packet several days ahead of the meeting, which has all the backup documentation on everything from architectural applications to assessment liens to proposed contracts for approval to expenditures for approval. So as long as you have that board packet, that is the evidence that the board had business judgment rule input from the manager. And of course, if it's something more significant like a $500,000 construction project, well, now we're probably going to need more than something just from the manager. We're going to need an opinion from some kind of a consultant, most likely. So again, I don't think that's probably necessary, actually. Karen asks a great question. What is a consent calendar? I guess maybe I was trying to cover so much ground, Karen, I just went too fast today, and I'm sorry for that. But a consent calendar is when you take all of the non-controversial items on the agenda and you group them all together and you list them, item A, B, C, D, and so on, and you put them on a special part at the beginning of the agenda, and the chair says, all right, well, I'm now going to note the consent calendar, and you list the items on the consent calendar so the people in the audience know what's there. So you read out each item, and then you say, all right, is there any item that anyone wishes to remove from the consent calendar? If you're going to remove something from the consent calendar, then you can ask a question about it or have deliberations. If it stays in the consent calendar, there's one omnibus motion, no discussion, that approves all the items of the consent calendar. The idea is we get rid of all those really easy stuff and we save time for the stuff we have to talk about. Vanessa, I hope that answers your question too about the consent calendar. Let's see. How does the board enforce a fine? Joyce asks. Well, first of all, fines are imposed in a closed session disciplinary hearing. That is something I think I talked about in our last webinar, or 2 webinars ago actually. Disciplinary hearings are not open to all members. They should not be. Let's see. Let me see. I've got Streffen asks, change of membership of directors and officers seems like a good idea. How long max do you think someone should be president or be on the board at all? Oh, I'm sorry. This is from Jack. Okay. Well, Jack, that's an interesting question. I don't really have a strong opinion about term limits. There are strong arguments both ways. Sometimes people think that term limits are a great way to prevent dynasties in homeowner associations. But on the other hand, some associations have great people who are effective directors and officers who understand what they're doing, and the community is comfortable with their leadership. So I really struggle with term limits. One thing that perhaps would break things up a little bit is requiring that directors take a couple years off or 1 year off after they serve a couple of terms, so that you occasionally have some new blood come in. But I don't recommend for or against term limits, frankly. The clients tell me what they prefer because each has its drawback. I was a great fan of term limits many years ago with the California legislature. Now I realize that term limits has really proven not to be really great for us because we lose good talent in our legislature far too quickly. All right. Let's see. All right. Well, I appreciate the questions that have been asked. I'm trying to see. All right. Here's a question from Vanessa. I've got time for a few more questions. It's not too late. If you want to submit a question, I'll be glad to see if I can squeeze them in. Question from Vanessa. We recently discovered the previous president shredded documents and requested reimbursement for the cost. This was not on any agenda or open session. What are the requirements for destroying association documents? Well, first of all, certain documents have to be kept for at least a couple of years and the current year. Financial documents, you have to make them available to homeowners for the last 2 years and the current year. Financial documents are specifically defined in the Davis-Stirling Act. But with respect to other records that aren't specifically required to be available through disclosure to members, a lot of times your CPAs have opinions. I think 5 or 7 years is a common rule of thumb. But if a board member is going to incur an expense for the association, that has to be authorized somehow. So if a board member shreds a bunch of documents, let's assume for the moment that they were documents that needed to be shredded for whatever reason because they were stale. That's still an expense that the president should have submitted to the association for approval in advance. So an interesting situation there for that president. Let's assume, number one, that the president actually was shredding documents that should have been discarded. Still, the board of directors could decide that, well, we didn't want those to be shredded, or we didn't think that expense was reasonable, and so we're not going to approve the reimbursement on that. So bottom line, board members and presidents, when you are running up any kind of cost for the association that you expect to be reimbursed, make sure that you have some kind of authority in advance so that you don't have the risk that the association decides not to reimburse you. Patsy has a common but a very pertinent question. If a board member disagrees with the association board on a decision, and this decision may have potential liability, does that director have to stay silent? Well, this goes to the question of fiduciary duty. When you are attending the board meeting, directors, you are there to bring your best brain and your background and experience into that meeting. That means that it's expected that from time to time you're going to disagree with your colleagues. You're going to see things differently. You may or may not be right, of course, but we expect you to vote your conscience. So your duty is to come prepared and to use your best judgment and to vote the way you think is in the best interest of the association. That's what the business judgment rule demands of you. However, once the board has a vote and it votes, say, 4-1 against you, the corporation has now decided. The decision is closed. You, as a director, now have a responsibility to support the decision of the corporation because you owe your fiduciary duty to the corporation. So that's the hard part, is sometimes you disagree with the decision, but you have to pick up your oar and row the boat along with everybody else in a direction that you disagreed with. But that's what your responsibility is. If the decision is so wrongly headed that you really do not think you can in good conscience support the decision of the board, then your only choice is to quit. You do not have the option to undercut and to fight and build support among the members to recall the board or to otherwise frustrate the board's decision. If you want to do that, then you need to quit the board first. So that's really a difficult thing, Patsy, but that's really how it works. Is you can't stay on the board and fight the board at the same time. Okay. Question from Vanessa: can a committee member be considered personnel such that their appointment is properly in executive session? The answer is absolutely not. Personnel, Vanessa, are people who get paychecks from the association. If they're not getting a paycheck from the association, they're not an employee, they're not personnel. So committee members, board members, vendors, the hiring of a plumber, that's not personnel. The hiring of a management company, that's not personnel. So certainly the contractual negotiations with that vendor, that need to be in closed session. The formation of the contract where you're deciding what you're going to offer that vendor. But no, committee members, directors, inspectors of election, those are not personnel. Those have to be handled in open session. And I realize that sometimes can be awkward, but that's what the Open Meeting Act, and frankly, I think that's what our neighbors in the community expect from us. Maurice asks, should a director have professional insurance in case a resident sues the board? Yes, I think that no matter how large or small, your associations all should have officers and directors insurance. That's readily available for most of you from your insurance brokerage source, and that's really important for you volunteer directors because if I remember correctly, 100 or less homes, $500,000 is all you need, and then the directors are protected. If you're 100 homes, more than 100 homes, you need $1 million minimum coverage. And of course, that statute probably needs to be updated because $1 million ain't what it used to be, right? Okay, let's see. Let me see if I can get one more question in as we're just about at the end of our hour. Mary asks, when discussing the minutes topic, you cover the concept of how to document justification of a board decision on a complicated topic. Can you please briefly repeat? Yeah, Mary, what I'm talking about there is that when you have a complicated major decision where you want to document the board's business judgment considerations, that's actually not done in the minutes at all. That's typically going to be done in a board resolution. So if the board packet isn't enough, if the recommendation or the letter from your consultant report isn't enough, then that may need to be something that is drafted very often by your association legal counsel, a separate document that becomes part of the minutes, but it's called a board resolution. All right. So I hope that was helpful. Just a quick hint. Lee wants to know, Where do we discuss a Christmas bonus for our professional manager, open or closed session? Well, is the manager an employee? Do they receive a paycheck and a W-2 from the association, or does their company receive the check? And if they're not an employee, then they're a vendor. And so, yeah, that is not eligible for closed session because they're not personnel. Now, you may want to consider setting up a subcommittee of the board to deal with something like that, but that subcommittee would need to be making a recommendation to the board. The subcommittee would have to be appointed in open session. So the community should be disclosed that this is being discussed. Now, obviously, so that the manager is surprised, you would want to make sure that they were not invited to the meeting or where you're discussing the bonus for them. But that's a little bit tricky if they're a vendor and not an employee. Now, if they're a vendor also, some people would argue that, well, vendors don't need a bonus because they're already being paid and they're not an employee. But I'll leave that to all of you and your association lead to sort that out. Well, we're at exactly the 1 hour point. We've had an action-packed time together. I apologize. There are a bunch of you that submitted questions today that I wasn't able to get to. I appreciate all of you attending, and I hope you found this very useful. We will be placing this recording on our website, rhopc.com, with our other webinars for on-demand viewing in 1 to 2 days from today. So by January 23rd at the latest, this should be available on the rhopc.com website. So thanks again for participating. I wish you all a great day, and we'll see you on March 23rd. Thanks all. Bye now.